Okay, we're going to go over the answers to the geometric mean questions and the special right triangles testing questions from the retest. Okay, on number 1 and 2, they deal with geometric means. And here's your rule. M is the geometric mean, GM for geometric mean, between two positive numbers, A and B, if M is the square root of those two numbers multiplied, the square root of the product. And it's just a definition you have to know. So on number 1, we're trying to find the geometric mean. We're trying to find M. We're given the A and the B over here in the formula. So M, our geometric mean, is the square root of the two numbers multiplied. So it's the square root of 20 times 5, which is the square root of 100, which is 10. So the answer to number 1 is 10. On number 2, we know what the geometric mean is. 5 is the geometric mean, so it's the M in that formula. So M is that. The 2 and the X, that's your A and B in the formula. So 5 is the geometric mean between 2 and X. So it's the square root of 2 times X. In order to get down to X to find out what it is, you have to square both sides. So if you square that side and square that side, you'll still have a true equation. 5 squared is 5 times 5 is 25. And when you square a square root, they just undo each other, and you're left with whatever's underneath them. So the right side is just 2x. Now divide by 2, and x will be 12.5. So the answer to number 2 is 12.5. Okay, down here on problem number 5, whenever you draw, okay, I'm going to draw a triangle ABC before we put anything into it. So it looks like this. Here's triangle ABC. Right angle at A. That makes this guy over here is the hypotenuse. AB is a leg. I'm going to call it leg 1. It doesn't matter. And AC is another leg. I'll call it leg 2. Okay. Now, when we put in this guy down the middle, this X is called the altitude. Because you can see if you turn it this way, that X would measure how tall the triangle is. So it's an altitude. And altitude always forms a right angle with the opposite side. That's how you know it's an altitude. When I put this X in here, I've just split the opposite side up into two parts. Let's call it this one part 1, because it's next to leg 1, and call that part 2, because it's next to, adjacent to, leg 2. Well, leg 1, that's an X. I'm going to write here altitude, because that's what it is. Leg 1, the altitude, and leg 2 are all geometric means in the picture. So that means they satisfy this definition. They're going to be the square root of two things multiplied. In the case of the altitude, it just split this hypotenuse into two parts. It's the altitude, it's the geometric mean between those two parts. So the altitude is the square root of part 2 times part 1. Now in the problem you're doing, right there, in the problem you're doing, problem number 5 down here, the altitude is x, and the two parts of the hypotenuse are 4 and 16. So you're going to have that x is the square root of 4 times 16. That means x is the square root of 64, and that works out to be a whole number. It's 8. So x is 8 on problem number 5. Y is one of our legs. Okay, the leg is the geometric mean between the part of the hypotenuse next to that leg and the whole hypotenuse. Now we got to do a little detective work here. My hypotenuse has two parts that are 4 and 16. That means the whole hypotenuse is 20. Okay, so now what we do is the leg, write the rule over here, leg is the geometric mean. That means it's the square root of the part next to that leg. I'll do this in terms of leg 1. It's the geometric mean between part 1 and the whole hypotenuse. Leg 2 is the geometric mean between the part of the hypotenuse next to that, which is part 2, and the whole hypotenuse. So we're just going to do 2 more geometric mean problems. Over in our picture, y is a leg. It's this leg 1. It's the geometric mean between the part of the hypotenuse next to it, 16, and the whole hypotenuse is 20. Okay, so that would mean that y is the square root of 16 times 20, which means it's the square root of 320. And we'll just grab a calculator and get that answer. So I've got my calculator here, and I'm just going to do the square root. Oops, I'm going to try to. Sure, I'm going to try to. Okay, so I got the square root. Second, x squared is the square root, there we go, of 320. And that's 17 point, depending on how we do it, let's say we're rounding to the nearest hundredth on the test, 17.89. So y over here is 17.89, approximately. Okay, our other geometric mean guy is the other leg. Leg 2 is the geometric mean between part 2 and the whole hypotenuse. So z is the geometric mean between 4 and 20. So now we're going to have z is the square root of 4 times 20. That means it's the square root of 80. And to the nearest tenth. Out of the calculator, I get, nearest hundredth, I get 8.94. Now, you might want to look back at the practice test. It's also just perfectly legal for me to tell you what y is, a number, and make one of those 2 variables. That's the same process you would have done on problem 5, problem number 2 in that case, where the number goes in for the geometric mean. Okay, the final type of problem that is on the test that we didn't talk about in our little review yesterday are these problems with special right triangles. And you just basically have to memorize the rules. The rules for 30, 60, 90 triangles. Okay, and up here, you don't see the 60, but there's a 30, so that's a 60. Okay, the rules are the long leg is the short leg times root 3, and the hypotenuse is twice as long as the short leg. It's short times 2. Okay, where do you find, well, hopefully you know that across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. So there's my hypotenuse. In that 30, 60, 90, it's the x. Here's my hypotenuse in this 30, 60, 90. It's the 11. Okay, now, the best thing to be given is the short leg because both of the formulas are just use the short times something. And that's what you're given over here. This 1/2 is opposite the 30. Opposite the small angle, you'll find the small or short leg. So this is short in this problem, which makes that long. Over on the other triangle, Right here is the 30. Opposite the 30, again, is short. So this is short, and this is long. Long doesn't have to be in the bottom. Long has to be opposite the 60. The short is always opposite the 30-degree angle. Small angle, small leg. Okay, so this was the easiest one to be given here. You're given the short. So using long equals short root 3, you get the y, which is long, equals 1/2 times the square root of 3. And they wanted us to leave roots in our answer here, so we're done. That's our answer. Y is 1/2 root 3. The hypotenuse is short times 2. So that means that hypotenuse, that's our x is 1/2 times 2. Well, 1/2 times 2 is 1. There's your x equals 1. Okay, they gave us a little harder case here. It's not the hardest. The hardest thing to work with is when you have long, because you have to divide by the square root. But over here, you're given the hypotenuse. 11's the hypotenuse. So I'm going to use the rule hypotenuse is short times 2. I'll just write it right underneath the rule. 11 equals the short, which we said was x, times 2. That means x is 5.5. Half of 11. And now use the rule long equals short root 3. Long is your y. It's equal to short, which we just figured out was 5.5, square root 3. So your answers are x was 5.5 and y is 5.5 root 3 over on number 9. Now look, when you get to the 4590s, one of the things has to be really easy. If the two angles are the same, then the two legs are the same. So your rule here is legs are congruent or equal. The rule for the hypotenuse is that it's the leg times root 2. Over here, the hypotenuse was short times regular 2. Here it's, in this case, the hypotenuse is leg square root 2. Well, this one becomes pretty easy then. Those are marked equal now, so y just equals 8. And x is the hypotenuse. It's the leg times root 2. X is equal to 8 square root 2. Okay, we've covered all the other questions in class yesterday, so I hope you do real well on your retest. Good luck.